Hey guys, tonight we begin with something a little darker, a story about vanity, power, and what happens when you mistake rejection for escape. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. This one's long. We're settling in for the full story tonight, the kind that unfolds slowly, like watching a king destroy himself, one terrible decision at a time. January 1540. A German noblewoman named Anne of Cleves steps off a boat in England. She's cold, seasick, terrified. She's been sent to marry Henry VIII, a king she's never met, whose language she doesn't speak. 6 months later, he divorces her, calls her a Flanders mare, says she's too ugly to even look at. The entire European court gossips about it. Anne signs the papers, without a word, takes her settlement, and disappears. And here's the part they don't tell you in history class. 20 years later, Henry VIII is dying. His body is rotting from the inside out. His leg ulcers smell like a corpse left in the sun. He's too fat to walk, too paranoid to trust anyone, and he's buried 2 more wives since Anne. And in those final months when the pain won't let him sleep and the servants have to turn his massive body like cargo, something starts to haunt him. A realization that creeps in during the dark hours when there's nothing left but truth. Anne of Cleves was the smart one, the one who got away, the only wife who beat him, and by the time he figured it out, she was living in a palace, sleeping peacefully, completely out of his reach. She outlived him by a decade. She outlasted every single one of his other wives. Want to know how she did it? We need to start at the beginning. Back when Henry VIII wasn't a monster yet. Back when he was beautiful. Picture this. It's 1509. Henry is 18 years old, and he looks like he was personally designed by God to make other men feel inadequate. He's 6'2". In the 16th century, that makes him a giant. His body is pure muscle from constant jousting, hunting, wrestling, sword fighting. His hair is red gold, catching light like literal fire. His skin is fair and smooth. His eyes are small but sharp, missing absolutely nothing. People who saw him wrote that he was almost supernatural. One ambassador said Henry looked like a god descended from Olympus. Another wrote that he was the handsomest potentate I ever set eyes on, above nature itself. This wasn't flattery. This was a young man who could ride for 12 hours straight without breaking a sweat, win every tournament he entered, compose music that's still performed today, speak Latin, French, and Spanish fluently, and charm, literally, anyone. And here's the thing about being that beautiful, that talented, that worshipped from the moment you're born. You start to believe the world exists to adore you. Henry wasn't supposed to be king. That was his older brother Arthur's job. Arthur got groomed to rule. Henry got to be perfect without pressure. He studied everything, learned to joust so well that grown knights refused to face him, composed masses and love songs, read philosophy and theology. Then Arthur died, suddenly, at 15. 11-year-old Henry became heir to the English throne. When their father died in 1509, 18-year-old Henry inherited a kingdom, a fortune, and a world that seemed designed to worship him. His coronation was a massive party. Tournaments, feasts, music, everyone celebrating. Henry jousted and won. The crowd went insane. Within weeks he married Catherine of Aragon, his dead brother's widow. She was 23 to his 18, and she'd spent 7 years in England waiting to see if anyone would marry her after Arthur died. Young Henry rescued her, and for a while it was actually romantic. She was experienced, educated, poised. He was dazzling and energetic. They danced, they hunted. He wrote her poems. She adored him. For about a decade, Henry VIII was everything England could have wanted. Strong, charismatic, confident. But there was a crack forming. Small at first, easy to ignore. Catherine kept getting pregnant, and the babies kept dying. Here's what they don't tell you about being a Tudor queen. Your entire value, your entire existence, comes down to one thing: producing a son. Not just a baby, a son. Daughters don't count. Daughters can't inherit without triggering civil war. Catherine got pregnant 6 times in 9 years. First baby, stillborn daughter. Second, a son named Henry, who lived 52 days and then just stopped breathing. Third, miscarriage. Fourth, another miscarriage. Fifth, stillborn son. Finally, in 1516, Catherine gave birth to a healthy baby. Mary, a daughter. She survived. She was intelligent, healthy, loved by both parents. But she wasn't a son. And in Henry's world, in the brutal mathematics of Tudor succession, that wasn't enough. Henry had watched the Wars of the Roses tear England apart for 30 years. Cousins murdering cousins, noble families wiped out, fields soaked in blood. He needed a male heir to prevent that from happening again. Catherine kept trying, but by the early 1520s she was in her late 30s. Her body had given up. The pregnancy stopped, and Henry started looking elsewhere. That's when Anne Boleyn walked into his life, and that's when the Golden Prince started his transformation into the thing he'd become. Anne Boleyn wasn't conventionally beautiful, not like the pale, blonde, soft women who were considered ideal. Anne was striking. Dark hair, dark eyes, sharp features, long neck. She had a 6th finger on one hand, just a little nub of flesh, and bone that her enemies later called a witch's mark. But what made Anne dangerous wasn't her looks, it was her brain. She'd spent years at the French court, where women had actual power, actual education, actual freedom. She knew how to dress, how to debate, how to keep powerful men interested without giving them what they wanted. She'd watched her sister Mary become Henry's mistress and then get tossed aside with nothing to show for it except a ruined reputation. Anne wanted more. When Henry started pursuing her in the mid-1520s, drowning her in gifts and love letters, Anne refused to sleep with him, kept him at arm's length, close enough to stay obsessed, far enough to stay hungry. She wanted marriage, a crown, real power, and Henry, completely obsessed, gave it to her. But here's the problem. Henry was already married to Catherine, and the Catholic Church didn't do divorces. So Henry did what narcissists do when reality doesn't cooperate with their desires. He rewrote reality. He convinced himself his marriage to Catherine was cursed. Found a Bible verse, Leviticus 20:21, that said, "Marrying your brother's widow was forbidden." Decided God was punishing him with dead sons. Never mind that the Pope had given special permission for the marriage. Never mind that Catherine swore Arthur had never touched her. Henry needed out, and Scripture gave him the excuse. He demanded an annulment. Catherine refused, not out of spite, to protect their daughter. If the marriage was invalid, Mary would become a bastard. Stripped of her inheritance, removed from succession, Catherine wouldn't allow it. So she fought, stood in front of ecclesiastical courts and declared that she'd come to Henry's bed a virgin, that her marriage to Arthur was never consummated, that her marriage to Henry was valid in God's eyes. Henry didn't care. He petitioned the Pope. The Pope said no. Catherine was the aunt of Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, the most powerful man in Europe. The Pope couldn't afford to anger him. So Henry did something no English king had ever done. He broke with Rome, declared himself supreme head of the Church of England, dissolved monasteries, seized their wealth, created a new religious order with himself at the top, annulled his own marriage without papal permission, and in January 1533 he secretly married Anne Boleyn. Catherine was stripped of her title, no longer queen, just Princess Dowager, banished from court, separated from her daughter Mary, exiled to cold, drafty castles in the countryside. She spent her final years forbidden from seeing the daughter she'd fought so hard to protect, slowly dying of what was probably cancer. She died in January 1536, alone except for a few loyal servants, still insisting she was Henry's true wife. Still wearing her wedding ring, Henry wore yellow to her funeral, the colour of joy. He danced, he threw a banquet, but Anne Boleyn's days were already numbered. Want to know why? Because Anne couldn't give him a son either. Anne gave birth in September 1533, a daughter, Elizabeth, healthy, red-haired, loud. Henry was disappointed but confident. The next one would be a boy. It wasn't. Anne miscarried in 1534, then again in January 1536. This time it was a boy, a male fetus, developed enough that everyone could see what it could have been. Henry's son, dead. Henry's patience, never his strong suit, snapped. Think about what he'd done for Anne. Destroyed his first marriage, broken with Rome, making himself a heretic in Catholic Europe's eyes. Risked his kingdom, his reputation, his soul. For what? Another woman who couldn't give him sons. Worse, Anne had made enemies. Lots of them. She was proud, sharp-tongued, uninterested in playing meek and grateful. She argued with Henry in public. She mocked his advisers. She pushed religious reforms that alienated conservatives. The common people hated her, saw her as the foreign whore who replaced beloved Queen Catherine. By early 1536, Henry wanted her gone. But he couldn't just divorce her. That would make him look weak, would validate Catherine's supporters, would throw Elizabeth's legitimacy into question. So Henry did what tyrants do when divorce is inconvenient. He destroyed her. May 1536, Anne was arrested on charges of adultery with 5 men, including her own brother George, also charged with plotting to murder the king. It was absurd. The evidence was fabricated, based on courtly flirtations twisted into affairs, confessions extracted under torture, coincidences turned into conspiracies. Didn't matter. Henry wanted her dead. Imagine you're Anne Boleyn. 3 years ago, you were crowned Queen of England in a ceremony so lavish it bankrupted the treasury. Now you're standing in the Tower of London, the same place you stayed before your coronation. Except this time, you're a prisoner awaiting trial for crimes you didn't commit. The trial is a performance. The jury is packed with men who hate you. You're not allowed a lawyer. You're not allowed witnesses. You're expected to answer each charge on the spot, with no preparation. And even if you could prove your innocence, which you can't, because how do you prove you didn't sleep with someone? It wouldn't matter, because Henry has already decided. Anne was convicted. So were the 5 men. They were executed first, beheaded on Tower Hill, while Anne watched from her window. Her brother George went last. Before he died, he gave a speech warning against false accusations. He knew. They all knew. May 19th, 1536. Anne walked to a scaffold on Tower Green. She'd asked Henry for one mercy. Instead of a clumsy English axeman with a heavy axe, could she have a French swordsman? Supposed to be quicker, cleaner. Henry agreed. Last kindness he ever showed her. Anne wore grey damask and ermine. Her hair was pinned up, her neck exposed. She gave a carefully worded speech. Couldn't say anything that might get her. Family punished after she was gone. Said she'd been judged according to law and deserved death for offending the king. Forgave her enemies. Asked people to pray for the king. Then she knelt. The swordsman was good. He distracted her, shouted to his assistants to bring the sword. Anne turned her head. The blade came from the opposite direction. One clean stroke. Henry was engaged to Jane Seymour the next day. Let that sink in. The next day. If Anne Boleyn was fire, Jane Seymour was water. Pale, blonde, soft-spoken, submissive. Everything Anne wasn't. That's exactly why Henry picked her. Jane had been one of Anne's ladies-in-waiting. Front row seat to Anne's rise and fall. She'd watched Catherine die in exile and Anne lose her head. Jane understood the assignment. Don't challenge Henry. Don't argue. Don't fail. She was meek, obedient, traditional, modest gowns covering everything. Quoted scripture. Made it clear she existed only to serve. Henry adored it. They married 11 days after Anne's execution. 11 days. Anne's blood hadn't even dried on the scaffold. And for a while, Jane seemed like the perfect solution. She didn't threaten him. She didn't argue. Conservative nobles loved her because she represented a return to tradition before Henry's break with Rome. She quietly worked to reconcile Henry with Mary, who'd been declared a bastard and cut off. Then, October 1537, Jane gave Henry what he'd wanted for nearly 30 years. A son, Edward, born at Hampton Court, healthy, screaming, perfect. Henry wept. The kingdom celebrated. Church bells rang for days. Bonfires everywhere. Finally. The Tudor line was secure. Jane Seymour died 12 days later. Childbed fever. Her body couldn't fight the infection. She developed a fever that spiked, became delirious, thrashed in bed burning from the inside. Doctors bled her, which made it worse. Gave her herbal remedies that did nothing. Within days she was gone. Henry was genuinely devastated, mourned for months, wore black, refused to celebrate Christmas, ordered that when he died he'd be buried beside her. And here's the thing, Jane was the only wife he never turned on. She died before he could, died at the perfect moment, frozen forever as the ideal wife in his memory, the one who gave him a son and asked for nothing. But Jane didn't survive because she was smarter or luckier. She survived because she gave Henry a son and then conveniently died before he could get bored or disappointed. By 1539, Henry was alone again. Edward was only 2, fragile and sickly. Henry himself was aging, his health declining. 48 years old now. His jousting days over. A jousting accident had left him with a leg ulcer that refused to heal, kept getting infected, smelled like rotting meat. He was gaining weight, not yet the grotesque mountain he'd become, but the athletic body was gone. He moved slower, got winded on stairs, started feeling mortal, and England was isolated, surrounded by Catholic enemies who wanted him dead for breaking with Rome. The Holy Roman Emperor and the King of France had signed a treaty. If they invaded together, England wouldn't survive. Henry needed allies, Protestant allies. That's when Thomas Cromwell stepped in with a plan. A 4th wife, from a powerful Protestant family in Germany. And that's how Anne of Cleves entered the story. The woman from nowhere who would rewrite all the rules. Anne of Cleves was never supposed to be famous. She was raised to be invisible, born in Dusseldorf, September 1515, second daughter of John III, Duke of Cleves. Cleves wasn't powerful, just a small duchy, strategically located but not wealthy or influential, Protestant-leaning, neutral, desperately needing allies. Anne's mother Maria was intensely religious and conservative. She believed women should be modest, silent, obedient. Period. Anne learned needlework, household management, basic reading in German. That's it. No dancing, no musical instruments, no French or English or Latin, no flirting, no charm lessons. Her world was small, contained, safe. She had a sister, Amalia, and a brother, William. William would inherit. Anne's job was simple. Marry well, bear children, don't cause trouble. By her mid-20s, Anne was still unmarried. Unusual, but not scandalous. She was plain by European court standards. Not ugly, just unremarkable. Brown hair, round face, clear skin. Not the kind of woman who turned heads. And she was fine with that. Anne didn't dream of crowns or power. She expected to marry some minor German nobleman, manage his household, raise his kids, die quietly where she was born. But Thomas Cromwell had different plans. Cromwell was Henry's chief minister, architect of the English Reformation, the man who'd made it possible for Henry to break with Rome. He was brilliant, ruthless, pragmatic, and he knew exactly what Henry needed. A 4th wife, Protestant, from a powerful German family, someone to bring military alliances. Cromwell looked at Cleves. He sent ambassadors to assess Anne and her sister, Amalia. Reports came back positive. Pleasant, well-mannered, attractive in a modest way. But Cromwell needed more than descriptions. Henry was particular, vain. He needed to see. So Cromwell commissioned Hans Holbein, the younger, the royal court painter, to travel to Dusseldorf and paint Anne's portrait. Now, Holbein was famous for realism. He didn't flatter. When Holbein painted you, he painted what he saw. So when Cromwell showed the portrait to Henry, Henry had every reason to believe it was accurate. The portrait shows Anne in three-quarter view. Elaborate German dress. Heavy brocade. Jewelled headpiece. Her face calm, neutral. Not smiling, not frowning. Just pleasant. Henry looked at it and said yes. Not enthusiastically. Not with the obsession he'd felt for Anne Boleyn. Just yes. She'll do. Young enough to have kids. Protestant. Politically useful, reasonably, attractive according to Holbein. Good enough, marriage contract signed. Anne, barely understanding what's happening, is told she's going to England to marry the king. She doesn't protest, she's been raised to obey. This is an extraordinary honour. Her family is thrilled. December 1539. Anne sets out on the long journey to England. Winter storms, freezing rain. Roads turn to mud. She travels with a huge retinue, her belongings packed into dozens of chests. She has no idea what's waiting for her, doesn't speak English, doesn't know English customs, has never seen a portrait of Henry, knows he's a king but doesn't know he's 48, that he's executed one wife and exiled another, that his temper is legendary, that his body is failing. All she knows is she's going to be queen. And Henry's at Greenwich Palace, pacing, impatient, excited, convinced he's getting a younger, prettier, more obedient version of Jane Seymour. Neither of them knows they're about to meet each other's worst nightmare. December 27th, 1539. Anne arrives in England. The crossing was brutal. Winter storms, massive waves, freezing wind. She's seasick, exhausted, terrified, though she hides it. Been trained since childhood not to show weakness. She lands at Deal in Kent, gets escorted to Rochester to rest before continuing to London. Her rooms are prepared. Attendants fuss over her. She changes out of travel clothes, tries to eat but can't because her stomach is in knots. She practices English phrases. Good morning. Thank you. I am honoured. Her accent is thick, the words clumsy, but she tries anyway. She has no idea what Henry looks like. No one showed her a portrait. All she knows is he's powerful. He broke with Rome, and marrying him will change her life forever. Meanwhile, Henry's at Greenwich Palace, pacing, excited, impatient. He's been waiting months. He's stared at Holbein's portrait so many times he's memorised it, written her letters she can't read, sent gifts, built her up in his mind as everything he wants, young, fresh, grateful, eager to please. And then New Year's Eve, Henry can't wait anymore. He has an idea, a romantic idea, the kind of impulsive theatrical gesture he's always loved. He's going to surprise Anne. He'd done this before with Catherine of Aragon. Dressed in disguise, showed up unannounced. She saw through it immediately. It was charming, magical, proof they were destined. So Henry does it again. He dresses in ugly, plain clothes, takes a few companions, rides to Rochester, bursts into Anne's chambers while she's standing by the window, watching a bull baiting in the courtyard. Anne turns, startled. She sees strange men in her room, large, sweaty, red-faced, staring at her. She has no idea who they are. Henry stands there, waiting for recognition, for her to gasp, realise who he is, fall to her knees in awe. Anne looks at him, politely confused. She's been raised to be modest, reserved, careful, around strange men. And these are strangers, random men who barged into her private chambers. So she does what she was trained to do, nods politely, smiles a little, turns back to the window, clearly hoping they'll take the hint and leave. Henry is humiliated. This isn't how it's supposed to go. She's supposed to know him, sense his majesty, be overwhelmed by his presence. Instead, she dismissed him, turned away, treated him like an intrusive servant. He storms out, changes into royal robes, returns. This time Anne knows who he is. Of course, he's wearing a crown, surrounded by officials. She drops into a deep curtsy, greets him formally in German through a translator, tries to be gracious despite having no clue what just happened. Too late. In Henry's mind, Anne failed the test. She didn't recognise him, wasn't awed, didn't perform the adoration he requires. He looks at her again, critical, hostile. Her German dress is heavy, unflattering, completely foreign. Her face is pleasant but ordinary. She's not ugly, but she's not the glowing vision he imagined from the portrait. Doesn't sparkle, doesn't flirt, doesn't look at him like he's God's gift to women. Worst of all, she rejected him. Not intentionally, but she did. Henry's pride, always fragile, always hungry, shatters. Later, he complains bitterly to advisors, says he was deceived. Holbein's portrait lied. Anne is nothing like he expected. He calls her a Flanders mare, a clumsy, ungainly workhorse. But here's the truth. Anne looked exactly like her portrait. Exactly. Holbein didn't lie. The problem was Henry. He'd built an impossible fantasy. When reality didn't match his delusion, he lashed out. Anne has no idea any of this is happening. She thinks the meeting went well. She was respectful, polite, did everything right. She has no idea her marriage is already doomed. January the 6th, 1540, the wedding. Should be a celebration. It's grim, obligatory. Everyone knows it's a mistake, but no one can stop it. Henry goes through with it because backing out would be catastrophic, would humiliate the Duke of Cleves, destroy England's alliance with Protestant Germany, make Henry look weak. So Henry stands there next to a woman he despises and says his vows through gritted teeth. Anne does her part. Wears uncomfortable English dress, heavy with jewels. Repeats English words phonetically, accent thick. Smiles when supposed to. Bows when supposed to. Then comes the wedding night. Here's where it gets pathetic. Henry later tells his advisors, in humiliating detail, that he couldn't consummate the marriage. Claims Anne's body displeaseth him. Says she has bad breath, though no one else mentions this. Suggests she might not be a virgin, that her breasts and belly show signs of pregnancy. All lies. The truth? Henry can't perform. He's 48, weighs over 300 pounds. His leg ulcer is infected, oozing pus through bandages. The pain is constant. His body's failing in ways he can't control. But Henry can't admit that. His masculine pride can't handle being the problem. So he blames Anne. And Anne has absolutely no idea what's expected. She was raised in a household where sex was never discussed. Her mother told her nothing. Zero education, zero preparation, zero understanding of what consummation means. So when Henry climbs into bed, kisses her briefly, pats her hand, rolls over and sleeps, Anne thinks that's it. That's marriage. She later tells her ladies-in-waiting, completely sincere, "When he comes to bed, he kisses me, and taketh me by the hand, and biddeth me, Good night, sweetheart. And in the morning kisses me, and biddeth me, Farewell, darling. Is this not enough?" Let that sink in. She thought a kiss and a pat was sex. Her innocence is almost tragic. She thinks she's doing everything right, thinks she's properly married, actually queen. But at court, whispers start. Henry leaves her chambers every morning looking frustrated, angry, humiliated. He snaps at servants, avoids Anne during the day. At public events, sits as far from her as possible. Anne tries to adjust, tries to learn English faster, tries to fit in with English ladies who look down on her for being foreign, unfashionable. She wears English dress even though it doesn't suit her. Sits through long ceremonies, smiling politely while understanding almost nothing. And Henry keeps looking elsewhere, starts flirting openly with other women, especially Catherine Howard. 17 years old. Auburn hair, petite, bubbly. Everything Anne isn't. Anne sees it. She's not blind. But she's been taught to be obedient, not make scenes, accept whatever her husband does. Queens don't complain, so she says nothing. Meanwhile, Thomas Cromwell is panicking. He pushed for this marriage, staked his career on it. Now it's falling apart, and Henry blames him. By spring 1540, court is thick with tension, everyone waiting to see what happens. Will Henry divorce her, annul it, execute her like Anne Boleyn? Anne keeps her head down, attends functions, prays, waits. June 1540, Cromwell is arrested. Charges: treason and heresy. Real crime, giving Henry a wife Henry didn't want. Cromwell is executed in July. With Cromwell dead, nothing protects Anne anymore. Henry's advisors approach her quietly. Don't threaten directly, don't need to. The threat is implicit. They offer a deal. Well, offer is generous. It's an ultimatum in polite language. Agree to an annulment. Admit the marriage was never consummated. Accept you were never truly queen. Do this. Generous treatment, estates, money, title, protection, refuse, and... They don't say the rest, don't need to. Anne heard about Anne Boleyn, knows what happens to queens who displease Henry. She understands exactly what's being offered. A way out, a way to survive with her head attached. She signs immediately. No protest, no tears, no scene, just a signature. July 1540, annulment. Announced. Marriage declared invalid. Grounds non-consummation. Anne's supposed pre-contract, vague claim about a broken childhood engagement. Never proven. Henry's lack of consent. He was forced by political necessity. All nonsense. Didn't matter. Henry got his clean exit. Looked like the victim, not the villain. And Anne got a title, the King's beloved sister. Odd, but came with real benefits. Got Hever Castle, ironically, Anne Boleyn's childhood home. Got Richmond Palace, one of the most beautiful properties in England. Got several other estates. Got an annual income of $4,000, made her one of the wealthiest women in England. She'd been Queen of England for exactly 6 months. Walked away with her life, her wealth, her freedom. But here's what nobody talks about. Anne didn't just survive, she thrived. After the annulment, Anne could have disappeared. Retreated to an estate, lived quietly, been forgotten. Everyone expected that. Anne did the opposite, stayed visible, present, active. She accepted the King's beloved sister with grace and, let's be honest, probably massive relief. Ridiculous title, but it gave her something no other queen had. Independence, no husband, didn't answer to anyone, didn't have to produce heirs or manage moods or fear for her life. Free. Anne settled in with what must have been profound relief mixed with growing confidence. Wealth beyond anything she'd imagined. Hever Castle became a favourite. Beautiful grounds, comfortable rooms, loyal staff. Richmond Palace even better. Sprawling, elegant, on the Thames with stunning views. Her income made her one of England's richest women. And here's the crucial part. Didn't need permission to spend it. Didn't need approval to travel, buy furnishings, employ staff, host guests. She renovated her homes, filled them with tapestries, comfortable furniture, imported German goods, kept pets, dogs and birds she doted on, employed staff genuinely loyal to her, not spying, learned English, actually learned it properly without pressure of pleasing a hostile husband, became fluent, could read, write, converse naturally. And here's where Anne showed real intelligence, maintained a cordial relationship with Henry. Think about that. The man who humiliated her, rejected her, called her ugly in front of Europe. Anne could have retreated in bitterness, made herself his enemy. Instead, played the game perfectly. Continued attending court functions when invited. Sat at banquets, smiled politely. Exchanged gifts with Henry at Christmas and New Year's. Nothing expensive enough to seem desperate, thoughtful enough to maintain goodwill. even played cards with him and his new wives. Imagine that, sitting across from Catherine Howard, the teenager who replaced you, while Henry watches, just playing cards, smiling, being pleasant. Anne knew exactly what she was doing. By being gracious, never complaining, never causing problems, she made herself untouchable. Henry couldn't vilify her because she gave him no reason. She became the ideal ex-wife, grateful, respectful, no longer a threat. But Anne didn't just maintain Henry's goodwill. She cultivated relationships with his children. This is where she showed brilliance, became friendly with Mary, Catherine of Aragon's daughter. Mary was Anne's age, actually slightly older, and had been through hell with Henry. Declared a bastard, separated from her mother, forbidden from using her royal title. Mary appreciated Anne's kindness. Anne never competed with Catherine's memory, never did anything to hurt Mary. They exchanged letters, sent gifts, developed genuine friendship. Anne was warm toward Elizabeth, Anne Boleyn's daughter. Elizabeth was just a child when Anne was briefly queen, but Anne had been kind. Elizabeth remembered. Years later, when Elizabeth became queen, she remembered the German woman who'd been gentle when kindness was rare, and Anne adored little Edward, Henry's precious son, sent him presents, toys, books, clothing, visited when allowed, wrote letters in improving English, always appropriately deferential, never overstepping, but warm and affectionate. By cultivating these relationships, Anne secured her future. No matter which child inherited, Anne would have an ally. She was thinking long-term, something Henry never seemed capable of. Anne also surrounded herself with culture and learning, read extensively, religious texts, histories, literature, collected art, hosted small intellectual gatherings at her estates, invited scholars, musicians, interesting people, genuinely curious about the world, about ideas, about the England she'd been thrust into, and she never remarried. Important. Anne was in her mid-20s when the marriage ended. Wealthy, titled, free. Could have found another husband. Probably German nobles who'd have been thrilled. But she didn't. Whether her choice, and I suspect it was, or whether Henry quietly forbade it to avoid political complications, Anne seemed perfectly content single. Had everything she needed. Comfort, security, autonomy, freedom to read, think, live without fear. While Henry's other wives were trapped in marriages, trapped by pregnancy, trapped by fear, Anne was free. While Catherine died in exile, Anne lived comfortably. While Anne Boleyn was executed, Anne walked in gardens. While Jane Seymour bled out, Anne slept peacefully. While Catherine Howard faced the executioner, Anne played with her dogs. She'd escaped. Done it without making an enemy of the most dangerous man in England. But to understand just how wise Anne was, we need to watch what happened to Catherine Howard. Because Henry wasn't done destroying women, and what happened next would haunt him. Less than 3 weeks after divorcing Anne, Henry married again. He'd been courting Catherine Howard even before the annulment was final. 17 years old, auburn hair, fair skin, bright, flirtatious. Henry was 49, grotesquely obese, his leg ulcer oozing constantly. But when Catherine giggled at his jokes, he convinced himself he was young again. The wedding was private, Oatlands Palace, July 28, 1540. Same day Cromwell was executed. Henry called Catherine his rose without a thorn, showered her with jewels, gowns, estates, paraded her around court like a trophy, desperately trying to prove he was still powerful, desirable. Catherine played her part, smiled, curtsied, accepted the adoration, moved into Queen's apartments, wore the crown, presided over banquets. But Catherine had a past. Before court, she'd grown up in the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk's chaotic household. The Duchess ran a massive household with minimal supervision. Young ladies lived there, noble daughters sent for education and marriage prospects, but no chaperones, no curfews, no rules. Catherine had been involved with men before Henry. At 13 or 14, her music teacher, Henry Manox, had touched her inappropriately. Then Francis Derham, a young secretary, had carried on a full sexual relationship with her. They'd called each other husband and wife, exchanged gifts, witnesses everywhere. By Tudor standards, scandalous but not unheard of. Catherine was young, poorly supervised, probably manipulated by older men, but she made a fatal mistake as queen. Didn't cut ties. Francis Derham showed up at court after Catherine's wedding, asking for a position. Catherine, stupidly, naively, or out of fear of what he might reveal, gave him a job, made him her private secretary. Then she did something even more reckless. Started an affair with Thomas Culpeper, a young man in Henry's privy chamber. Handsome, charming, Catherine's age. Everything Henry wasn't. Catherine and Culpeper met secretly. Late nights in her chambers, her lady-in-waiting, Jane Rochford, widow of George Boleyn, Anne Boleyn's executed brother, facilitated, stood guard, passed messages, breathtakingly stupid, suicidal. By late 1541, rumours spread, servants talked, jealousies flared. People noticed Culpeper spending suspicious time near Queen's chambers at odd hours. Eventually, someone broke. John Lascelles, a Protestant reformer with an axe to grind against the Catholic Howard family, approached Archbishop Cranmer. Brought information, evidence, names, dates. Cranmer investigated. Confirmed Catherine had relationships before marriage. Found letters suggesting an affair now. Cranmer was terrified. Knew what this would do to Henry, but not telling would be treason. November 2nd, 1541, Cranmer left a letter for Henry detailing Catherine's past and present indiscretions. Henry didn't believe it, thought it was a plot, enemies framing her, ordered an investigation, confident it would clear her. Didn't. Under interrogation, Manox confessed. Derham confirmed their relationship. Jane Rochford broke completely, admitted facilitating secret meetings between Catherine and Culpeper. Then they found letters, Catherine's letters to Culpeper. Her own hand, affectionate, intimate. I heartily recommend me unto you, praying you to send me word how that you do. I never longed so much for a thing as I do to see you and speak with you. Yours as long as life endures. Henry was destroyed. Not because he loved Catherine, barely knew her, but because his pride was publicly humiliated. Again. An old, fat fool who thought a pretty teenager actually wanted him. He wept in front of his privy council, openly sobbing, raging one moment, self-pitying the next, called for a sword, said he'd kill Catherine himself, then collapsed into tears, lamenting how women used him. For the first time, his courtiers saw him completely break. Catherine was arrested, interrogated, imprisoned in her chambers at Hampton Court. Confessed to her past with Derham, but insisted her relationship with Culpeper was innocent. Just conversations, didn't matter. Even talking was treason for a queen. Derham and Culpeper were tried, convicted, December 1541. Punishment for men was worse. Derham was hanged, cut down alive, castrated, disemboweled, quartered. Body parts displayed on spikes around London. Culpeper, because of higher status, got merciful beheading. Catherine was attainted by Parliament, convicted without trial, stripped of title, declared guilty, condemned. February 13th, 1542. Catherine led to Tower Green. Same spot Anne Boleyn died, 18 years old. Legend says she asked for the block the night before, so she could practice laying her head on it, trying to die with dignity. Next morning walked out pale, trembling, composed, made a short speech confessing she deserved death for offending the king, forgave enemies, asked people to pray for the king, knelt, axe fell, Catherine Howard was gone. Henry never spoke her name again, but something broke inside him, something irreparable. The fantasy that he was still the Golden Prince, still desirable, still capable of inspiring genuine passion, shattered. Catherine exposed the truth he couldn't face. He was old, rotting, and the beautiful young woman he thought loved him had been faking it. Worse, actively betraying him while he paraded her around. Ultimate humiliation. Destroyed something that never came back. By 1543, Henry VIII was a medical nightmare in royal robes, 52 years old, over 400 pounds, couldn't walk without help. His leg ulcers so infected the smell preceded him. People could tell when the king approached just from the stench of rotting flesh. He needed a wife, not for love, not for children, already had Edward, for care. He needed a nurse. Catherine Parr was 31, twice widowed, intelligent, educated, deeply Protestant. First marriage at 17 to an older man who died. Second to a much older man who just died, leaving her comfortable. First time in her life, Catherine was free. No husband, no elderly invalids to care for, could do what she wanted. What she wanted was Thomas Seymour, Jane Seymour's brother, rising courtier. She'd fallen in love. They were courting, planning a future. Then Henry noticed her, and when Henry VIII noticed you didn't say no. Catherine understood exactly what she was walking into. She'd been at court, knew the statistics. Catherine of Aragon, exiled. Anne Boleyn, executed. Jane Seymour, dead in childbirth. Anne of Cleves, divorced. Catherine Howard, executed. Terrible odds. But refusing wasn't an option. Henry would take it as insult, make her life impossible, might accuse her of treason just for rejecting him. July 12th, 1543. Catherine Parr became the sixth and final wife of Henry VIII. Not a romantic marriage, a job. Catherine's role: manage Henry's household, care for his children, nurse his ailments, survive his moods. She was brilliant at it, patient, tactful, strategic. When Henry raged, and he raged often, pain making him vicious, she soothed him. When he was in agony, she brought medications, read to him, distracted him. When he wanted to debate theology, she engaged intellectually, but never contradicted too forcefully. She'd seen what happened to people who disagreed with Henry directly. She also worked quietly to reconcile Henry with his daughters. Mary and Elizabeth, both declared bastards, removed from succession. Cruel, unnecessary punishment, serving no purpose except Henry's spite. Catherine, carefully and patiently, convinced Henry to restore them, framed it as ensuring the Tudor line, giving Edward backup heirs, never made it about righting wrongs. That would imply Henry did something wrong. Couldn't do that. Worked. 1544, Parliament passed the Third Succession Act, restoring Mary and Elizabeth, a quiet victory that would change history. Catherine was also educated, well-read, genuinely interested in religious reform. Published a book, Prayers or Meditations, surprisingly popular, working on a more controversial theological text, pushing Protestant reforms, made her enemies, powerful enemies. Conservative factions led by Bishop Gardiner saw Catherine as dangerous Protestant radical, began building a case, gathering evidence of heretical beliefs, hoping to convince Henry she was a threat. 1546. Almost succeeded. Gardiner presented Henry with evidence of Catherine's dangerous views. Henry, paranoid and in constant pain, signed a warrant for her arrest. She was going to be questioned, interrogated, possibly burned for heresy. Catherine found out. Someone warned her, loyal servant, ally at court. Learned guards were coming, that she was about to be accused, that her life was over. Acted immediately, went straight to Henry, found him in his chambers, terrible pain from ulcers, collapsed in tears at his feet, threw herself on his mercy, told him she'd only debated theology to distract him from pain, to learn from his great wisdom, to pass time during illnesses. Wasn't trying to teach or correct him, just a weak woman trying to understand his brilliant mind. Performance, calculated, brilliant performance, played to Henry's ego perfectly. presented herself as humble, submissive, acknowledging his intellectual superiority. Henry, mollified and pleased, forgave her, told her she'd misunderstood, that he never really doubted her. Next day, guards came to arrest Catherine. Henry sent them away, roared at them. How dare they accuse the Queen? Didn't they know she was loyal? Catherine survived, barely, thinnest margin possible, remained at Henry's side for his final years, managing his care as his body collapsed. By late 1546 into 1547, Henry barely conscious most days. Bedridden, immobile, couldn't control bodily functions, ulcers everywhere, body one massive wound. Catherine supervised everything, made sure he was turned to prevent bed sores, made sure ulcers were drained, made sure he was fed, though he could barely swallow, kept clean, though nearly impossible given his size. Grueling, thankless work. The smell alone would break most people. Catherine endured, because that's what she did, survived. January 28th, 1547. Henry VIII finally died at Whitehall Palace. Body gave out, poisoned by years of infection, obesity, excess. Catherine Parr was at his bedside, finally free. Within months, married Thomas Seymour. Pregnant by fall. Happy. Genuinely happy. First time in years. Tragically, Catherine died September 1548 from childbed fever, days after giving birth to a daughter. But she'd survived Henry, outlasted him, done it through intelligence, patience, ability to make herself indispensable without becoming a target. But as Henry lay dying those final months, body failing piece by piece, one name kept surfacing in his diseased mind. Not Catherine, not even Jane, Anne of Cleves, the one who got away. Want to know what Henry's final years actually looked like? Not the sanitized history book version, but the reality? Let me paint you a picture. By 1545, Henry VIII was unrecognizable. The Golden Prince was gone. What remained was a horror show. His weight had ballooned past 400 pounds, maybe 450. Hard to know. No one was brave enough to weigh the king. He couldn't walk, couldn't stand unassisted. Moving him required a specially designed chair and 8 strong men. They had to install ramps at all his palaces because stairs were impossible. His leg ulcers, started as minor jousting injuries decades earlier, had become gangrenous wounds that never healed. Infection was systemic, spreading through his body, poisoning his blood. Ulcers had to be drained daily. The smell was so unbearable servants drew lots to see who'd do it. Imagine that smell. Rotting meat mixed with pus, sweet and putrid simultaneously. It clung to everything. His clothes, his bedding, the walls of whatever room he occupied. People could smell him coming from corridors away. His diet was grotesque, despite doctors' desperate advice. Henry consumed massive quantities of rich food, entire roasted meats, game birds stuffed with other birds, pies filled with whatever had been hunted, pastries dripping with honey and butter, wine by the gallon. He ate because food was one of few pleasures left, because eating briefly distracted from constant pain, because he could, but food made everything worse. His heart struggled under the weight. His breathing became laboured, wheezing, wet-sounding. He developed gout in hands and feet, joints swelling grotesquely, had episodes where he blacked out, face turning purple, eyes rolling back, courtiers genuinely thinking he was dying. He didn't die, not yet, just trapped in a body killing him inch by agonising inch. His mind deteriorated with his body. Henry became paranoid, convinced everyone was plotting, trusted no one, not advisors, not servants, not even Catherine Parr, though she'd proven loyalty repeatedly. He lashed out constantly. People who'd served faithfully for decades found themselves accused of treason on flimsy evidence. He executed more people in his final 5 years than any other period, not because of political necessity, because of fear and rage and pain that never stopped. But there were quiet moments too, when drugs dulled agony enough to think, when he lay in bed unable to move, staring at the ceiling, waiting for sleep that wouldn't come. In those moments, Henry remembered. He thought about his wives. How could he not? Catherine of Aragon, the first, the one he'd convinced himself was cursed. But in the quiet dark, did he remember how she'd loved him, how she'd stood by him for 20 years, how she'd fought for their daughter even from exile, still wearing her wedding ring when she died? Anne Boleyn, the obsession, the woman he'd burned down the world for. Had her executed on lies because she couldn't give him a son? Did he think about her last words? Forgiving her enemies? Asking God to save the king? Did he feel guilt? Or just echoes of old rage? Jane Seymour, the idealised one, perfect because she died before he could turn on her. He'd ordered burial beside her, cementing the fiction theirs was the great love story. But was it love? Or just comfort of never being disappointed? Catherine Howard, the humiliation, the teenager who made him look like a fool. He never spoke her name after execution, but shame lingered. Knowledge she'd betrayed him, probably never wanted him, that he'd been performing virility for a court that knew truth. Catherine Parr, patient, tireless Catherine, caring for him when no one else would. Reading to him, bringing medicine, surviving his rage. But even with Catherine, he knew she was there from duty, not desire. Knew she'd rather be anywhere else. And Anne of Cleves, Anne, who was still alive, still comfortable, still respected. Anne, who attended court functions, smiled politely, played cards, never caused problems. Anne, who'd walked away, with grace, wealth, freedom. Anne, who'd been smart all along. By mid-1540s, Henry must have started seeing her differently. Not as the ugly woman who disappointed him, not as the wife who failed his stupid test, but as the one who escaped. She never betrayed him, never schemed, never embarrassed him after the initial divorce. She'd accepted annulment gracefully, taken settlement, lived quietly, done everything right, and been happy, genuinely happy, in a way none of his other wives ever were. Henry saw her sometimes at court. She still attended major functions, Christmas, New Year's, important occasions. She'd arrive in fine German gowns, comfortable and confident now, speaking fluent English, laughing with his children. With Mary, who remembered Anne's kindness when kindness was rare. With Elizabeth, growing into a sharp, intelligent young woman. With Edward, who knew Anne as the gentle foreign lady who sent gifts and never demanded anything. Anne had real relationships with all of them, built on genuine affection, not political necessity. And she looked at ease in a way that must have haunted Henry. No fear in her eyes, no tension in shoulders, no performance, no mask, no desperate need to please. Free. Did Henry regret it? Did he lie awake at night, body screaming with pain, servants having to turn him every few hours to prevent bed sores, smell of his own rot filling the air, and think about what might have been different? What if he'd been patient with Anne instead of petulant, given her time to adjust, learn English properly, understand customs, seen her as a person instead of a disappointment? She wasn't ugly, never was, just ordinary, pleasant, kind, steady. Maybe that was the problem. Henry had spent his entire life being extraordinary, being worshipped, couldn't understand why anyone wouldn't be dazzled. Anne's failure to recognise him in disguise wounded him more than any battlefield injury. But what if that had been the point? What if Anne's greatest strength was not playing the game? She didn't perform adoration, didn't flatter or manipulate or scheme, was just herself. Honest, direct, maybe boring, and in Henry's world of constant performance and manipulation and fear, maybe boring was exactly what he needed. We can't know for certain what Henry thought in final years. Never wrote about regrets, never apologised. Kings didn't, but evidence is there if you know where to look. He kept Anne close, continued inviting her to court when he didn't have to, gave her additional gifts beyond original settlement, made sure she was honoured at state functions. And he never remarried after Catherine Parr, only 55 when he died. technically could have tried for a seventh wife. Available noble women existed. He didn't. Maybe he'd finally learned. Maybe, at the very end, he understood. The problem had never been his wives. It had been him all along. Let me tell you what Anne of Cleves was doing while Henry was dying. Living. Actually living. Not just surviving. Picture Richmond Palace on a summer afternoon in 1546. The gardens are in full bloom. Roses, lavender, herbs Anne's had planted. She's walking through them with her dogs. 2 small spaniels she's spoiled rotten. She's reading a book of poetry, German and English mixed, enjoying the fact she can finally understand both. Inside her rooms, there are tapestries she chose herself. Furniture she finds comfortable, not what some husband dictated. Books everywhere. Theology, history, literature, whatever interests her. Musical instruments she's learning to play, finally, because no one told her women from Cleves shouldn't. Her household staff actually likes her, not because they're afraid, but because she's fair, pays well, doesn't have random violent outbursts. Imagine that. Being an employer people don't dread seeing. She's been corresponding with Mary Tudor, Henry's eldest daughter. They've developed a genuine friendship. Mary visits sometimes, and they talk about everything. Religion, politics, the absurdity of court life. Mary trusts Anne because Anne never competed with her mother's memory, never played power games, never tried to use her. Anne also writes to Elizabeth occasionally. Elizabeth's just a teenager, but sharp as a blade. She'll remember Anne's kindness. Remember that when everyone else was playing dangerous games, Anne was steady. Anne's been to London recently, attended a banquet, saw Henry from across the room, couldn't miss him, took 8 men to carry his chair. She was polite, gracious, played cards with Catherine Parr later. Catherine seemed tired. Anne didn't mention it. When Anne returned to Richmond, she was grateful. Grateful for the comfortable carriage ride, for the beautiful rooms waiting, for the staff who greeted her warmly. Grateful she could kick off her uncomfortable court shoes and never see Henry again, if she chose. Most of all, grateful she wasn't Catherine Parr, wasn't trapped, wasn't nursing a rotting tyrant, wasn't counting days until freedom. Anne was already free. She'd been free for 6 years, and she was living better than any queen in England. This is what Henry was realising in his final years. While he rotted in rooms that smelled like death, Anne was walking in gardens. While he raged at servants, Anne was laughing with friends. While he lay awake in pain, Anne slept peacefully, in her own bed, in her own palace, answerable to no one. The wife he'd rejected was living the life he'd wanted, comfortable, secure, surrounded by genuine affection, and there was nothing he could do about it. January 28th, 1547. Henry VIII died at Whitehall Palace. His body was so massive, so grotesquely swollen, it took 16 men to carry his coffin. The coffin itself was enormous, specially constructed, reinforced. They buried him at Windsor Castle, St. George's Chapel, next to Jane Seymour. The funeral was elaborate, expensive, everything a king's funeral should be. Then everyone moved on. 9-year-old Edward VI was now king, sickly, bookish, controlled by ambitious advisors. Catherine Parr was free to marry Thomas Seymour. England was entering a new era, and Anne kept doing exactly what she'd been doing, living well. She was 41 when Henry died. She didn't attend the funeral, had no official status requiring it, and honestly, probably had no desire to be there. But she didn't disappear. She maintained her estates, attended court functions when invited, continued friendships with Edward and his sisters, careful, diplomatic, never overstepping, but visible, a respected figure, the foreign woman who survived the unsurvivable. When Edward died in 1553 after 6 years on the throne, England plunged into succession crisis. Edward's advisors tried putting Lady Jane Grey on the throne. Mary Tudor, Catherine of Aragon's daughter, raised an army, seized power. Mary remembered Anne, remembered her kindness, her friendship, her refusal to compete with Catherine's memory. Mary invited Anne to her coronation, not just as a guest, with a place of honour in the procession. Anne walked through London in royal robes, celebrated by crowds. More visible and honoured than she'd ever been as Henry's wife, must have been deeply, profoundly satisfying. Mary's reign was short and bloody, tried returning England to Catholicism, burned hundreds of Protestants as heretics, earned the nickname Bloody Mary, married Philip of Spain, desperately trying for a Catholic heir, never got pregnant, died in 1558, bitter and alone. Elizabeth the Fierce, Anne Boleyn's daughter, took the throne next. Elizabeth remembered Anne too, the kind German woman who survived her father, who remained gracious through everything. Anne attended Elizabeth's coronation as well. By this point, Anne was in her early 40s, health starting to decline, but still active, still present. She lived quietly in final years. Richmond Palace her favourite. Beautiful grounds, gardens she'd cultivated, rooms filled with books, art, comfort. She corresponded with friends, read, enjoyed the peace she'd fought to maintain. Anne of Cleves died peacefully, July 16th, 1557. Not in pain, not in childbirth, not on a scaffold, in her sleep, at Chelsea Old Manor, surrounded by servants who genuinely cared about her. She was 41 years old, young by modern standards, but in Tudor England, she'd lived longer than most of Henry's wives combined. She was buried at Westminster Abbey with full honours. Her tomb is simple but elegant. No elaborate effigies, no grand monuments, just her name, Anna of Cleves, not Queen, just Anna, perfect. Because being Queen would have killed her. By stepping aside, by letting go of the crown, by accepting King's beloved sister, and walking away with wealth and life, Anne saved herself. She outlived Henry by a decade, outlived Jane Seymour by 20 years, outlived Catherine Howard by 15, outlived Catherine Parr by 9. Of all Henry VIII's wives, Anne of Cleves lived longest, died most peacefully, left behind the most dignified legacy. She didn't just survive, she won. So here's the truth they don't teach you in history class, the truth that gets glossed over for more dramatic stories about beheadings and tragic love. Henry VIII didn't reject Anne of Cleves. Anne of Cleves escaped Henry VIII. When he called her ugly, when he humiliated her before Europe, when he annulled their marriage after 6 months, he thought he was punishing her. Thought he was showing her what happened when you disappointed a king. Thought he was asserting power, control, right to have whatever he wanted. But Anne saw something he didn't. She saw the exit, and she walked through it without looking back. She took the settlement, took the castle's money, ridiculous title, smiled, curtsied, said all the right things, then went home to Richmond Palace and lived freely, while Catherine of Aragon died in exile, still fighting for recognition, while Anne Boleyn walked to a scaffold, while Jane Seymour bled out after childbirth, while Catherine Howard was executed as a teenager, while Catherine Parr nursed a rotting tyrant. Anne lived in comfort, in peace, on her own terms. Never had to endure another pregnancy, watching her body swell, hoping the child would survive. Never had to navigate deadly court politics where one wrong word meant execution. Never had to watch Henry decay from golden prince to monster and pretend she didn't notice. She got out. Did it in the smartest possible way, by making Henry think it was his idea. And Henry spent the rest of his life cycling through wives, destroying women, growing more paranoid and violent and grotesque each year. His body rotted from inside. His mind deteriorated. His legacy became a cautionary tale about absolute power and unchecked ego. He died alone in every way that mattered, surrounded by servants who feared him, not loved him, married to a woman counting days until freedom, haunted by ghosts of wives he'd destroyed. Somewhere in England, Anne of Cleves was sleeping peacefully in her comfortable bed, in her beautiful palace, surrounded by gardens, books, loyal friends. The wife he'd called ugly became the only one who got the last laugh, not through revenge, not through schemes or politics or drama, just through the quiet, persistent act of surviving, of living well, of refusing to let Henry's rejection define her. Anne of Cleves understood something none of Henry's other wives could afford to understand. Sometimes the crown isn't worth your life. Sometimes walking away from power is the most powerful thing you can do. She let him have his pride. Let him have his narrative. Let him tell everyone she'd failed, that she was inadequate, that he'd rejected her. Then she took his money and lived better than any queen ever did, while he rotted in a golden tomb, weighed down by his own cruelty and excess, remembered as the king who destroyed everything he touched. Anne lies in Westminster Abbey, peaceful, dignified, remembered not as failure, but as the woman who survived the unsurvivable, the one who walked away, the one who won. So tonight, as you drift off, think about Anne. Think about her living in her castle, tending her gardens, reading her books, playing with her dogs, free from fear, free from pregnancy, free from constant terror of displeasing a tyrant. Think about her waking up every morning in her own bed, no husband to obey, no performance to give, no danger to navigate, just life, quiet, comfortable, peaceful life. And think about Henry, trapped in his failing body, haunted by wreckage of his choices, realizing too late that the woman he'd mocked and rejected had been the smartest person in the room all along. Sometimes the best revenge isn't fighting back. Sometimes it's just outliving them. Living well, living free, living long enough to watch them destroy themselves, while you sit in your garden, drinking wine, reading a book, perfectly content. Anne of Cleves did that, and history remembers her for it. Not as the ugly wife, not as the rejected queen, not as the failure, but as the woman who understood that sometimes survival is victory, that sometimes walking away is winning, that sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is take the exit when it's offered and never look back. She didn't fight Henry. She didn't try to change him. She didn't martyr herself for principle or pride. She just outlasted him, outlived him, and won. Sleep well.